So first of all, I would really and sincerely like to thank to the Slovenian Theatre Institute for the opportunity to be here and present this research project together with my colleagues who convinced me to be part of the open call. My name is ANJA DIMITRIJEVIĆ and I was born in Belgrade. While I pursued my career and studies in Venice, always in the University UA, where I earned the bachelor degree in visual arts, followed by 2 master degrees in applied theater and performing arts at the University UA. So my research sits at the intersection of performing practices, visual arts and education. And I'm particularly interested in how the performing arts engage with the environmental humanities, especially in the context of the current climate crisis. At present, I coordinate practical educational activities for the master program of theater and performing arts, always in Venice, with a focus on performance creation and production. And I'm also a member of Perla Research Unit, led by Professor Annalisa Sacchi, that we didn't mention today. So the work that I will be sharing today stems from a collaborative project with my colleague Laura Santini. I'm also part of a Confluence collective. And as you will see, we are going from the Mediterranean, Black Mediterranean, to the islands, and now in more broadly and specifically into the Venetian context. So this research-based project began in observation since 2018, but in realization since 2020, following the creation of a short experimental screen dance film entitled Intertidal Barene, which explored the salt marshes of the Venetian lagoon. After completing that project, so focused on the evanescence of the salt marshes and their erosion, for those who doesn't know what are the salt marshes, these are the coastal wetlands where salt-tolerant grasses and herbs inhabit the coastal zones, thriving in the regulation of the flooding of the water. So they're very important for the ecosystem. And in these years, while we were just asking the Venetian citizens about the salt marshes, it was not that much known, actually, what they were. So after learning much more about salt marshes and their erosion, we began to ask ourselves what are the most visible consequences of the climate change within the water itself. And there we started with a project that is called Repeating Eutrophia. So as I told you also that we had this very broader instinct and research of eutrophication. Eutrophication is a process of the proliferation of algae within the water bodies. And within this process, unfortunately, there are lots of alien species inside the lagoon that are very invasive, and they are very constant concern for coastal areas, especially in the northern Adriatic Sea, where several taxa have colonized the main transitional environments. The most abundant species within the lagoon actually come from Japan, and they are called Sargassum muticum and Undaria pinnatifida, that grow mainly on the docks of Venice Historical Center. So therefore their distribution is very significant. As I also had a background as a synchronized swimmer, I had long been asking myself, how can performance and research come together to bridge artistic practice and environmental humanities? And how can we bring the climate crisis into the space of the theater? How can we speak about it from and within performance? So just a little bit about the table of contents. I'm going to speak mostly about the project that is called Repeating Eutrophia, that once we realized it, the first episode, we decided to do different formats that are not only performances, but are also video, digital archives, and sound installations, always with the same title. So one of our first methods was to engage directly with the local community, to listen, observe, and understand how people in Venice respond to changing of the aquatic environment. And by spending time among citizens and workers, we quickly noticed that algae were everywhere, coasting the steps of the canals, wrapping around the boat ropes, clinging to the edges of buildings wherever they touch the salty water. We even discovered that algae appear in the work of art historians, those who study Baroque paintings of Venice, and where they observed how the water level has risen, and it was significantly lower than it is today, offering yet another confirmation of the sea gradual rise. So we paid attention for many years of how people interact within the omnipresent algae in everyday life. So you can see in these images the policeman that is cleaning the steps of Venice, the gondoliers scraping the green layers from their docks, young girls sitting in groups by the canals by scrolling on their phones and carefully avoiding the slippery algae while scrolling. So although Venice is highly urbanized, the surrounding lagoon still includes inhabited islands. One of them is San Terasmo, that is known also as a Garden of Venice. There we found some fertilizers used in local agriculture contribute to this chemical process that intensify the growth, algae growth, and making it even more difficult to control. So when speaking about this is the San Terasmo Island, and as you can see on the left, even the newspapers started speaking about this chemical process and imbalance. So bringing together these observations and reflections, we developed the project that I'm speaking about, calling Repeating Eutrophia. The term eutrophia refers to a state of a good nourishment of a hydric body, a healthy balance in an environmental body. Eutrophication, however, describes an excess of nutrients that leads to suffocation and to hypoxia, the absence of oxygen, and ultimately sometimes to death of different other species. To date, we have developed 7 different projects, all exploring the same delicate chemical balance between life and excess, but each from a distinct perspective and through a different artistic form. So we have also this idea to repeat the same project with the same title until we reach the actual eutrophication. So this first project is a multimedia performance that was made in 2019. We were invited by Extra Garbo at Sacca Fisola at the curatorial program of Divertimento per i Ragazzi, where we actually started this observation with graceful motions of marine algae, and we tried to make choreographical sequences by observing them, creating a visually captivating representation in their behavior. But we also understood that by that time we were still in a metaphor dimension. So that was also one of the reasons why we wanted to proceed with this research and to go out of the representation. The second project was finally in the swimming pool inside the Festival of Anime Gentili that was in 2022 in Pergola, where I told you already about that I had this background as a synchronized swimmer, and this was the first time we had a chance to make something that would be between swimming, synchronized swimming, and performance. So you can see here that we recreated the toxic surface of these algae that overtake also naturally in the waters, but just becomes much more frequent, unfortunately, due to climate change. The year after, 2023, we made a roller skate performance inside the island of Lido, By that time, we were also invited by Barbara Casavecchi and Pietro Consolandi, who were curating the project for the museum that is called Ocean Space, based in Venice. So by that time, we were very inspired by the Cecilia Lemani, curator of the Biennale the year before, who had a curatorial focus on cyborgs, as well as the work of Hito Steyl and the notion of STEM. So we approached algae both as an ecological accelerator and a symbol of access in this case. So in this case we had both the digital dimension, in which we made the QR codes in which people would be able to enter to the digital archive that we are still collecting, that are all concerned with this chemical process, together with the collaboration of skating school of Murano Island. So again, there was this big collaboration between different, not only islands, but collectives that are working inside. And then last year we had an opportunity to work again with the Ocean Space, but in that case for the educational program. By that time we were very inspired by the Karen Barrad's perspective of performativity of nature, in which she framed algal intoxication not only as a tragedy but as a natural dominance of one species over another. And that was a very inspiring moment in which we completely shifted our perspective. So as you can see, we had for the first time opportunity to create a workshop that would be a performative workshop for 100 children that were like 5 years old. And we made a kind of a choreographic game in which they were all divided for 4 groups. And by observing algae with, again, this textile, they were free to actually make their own algal sequence in choreographical terms. And that was very fun because in that case we got inspired even more, or also to see how children actually observe and how they are more free in interpretation of this specific process. And the last project was made this year. I still don't have the photos, but it is actually a sound journey that moves from intertidal zones into underwater environments. And in this piece, we interviewed there were scientific conferences together with journalistic investigations and testimonies from people who live and work in these fragile ecosystems. So again, it was very interesting to see how people still don't really know about the whole process, even though more and more frequently we see that something is changing inside the waters. Again, something a little bit more about performative research methods, engagement and awareness through art, and our interdisciplinary reflections. We were very inspired also by the book of Karen O'Rourke, Walking and Mapping, from 2013, where we employ walking as a method of inquiry, using movement through space as a way to perceive, engage with, and map the environment. This approach allows us to generate knowledge through physical presence and relational experience. We also focus on capturing emerging elements that are attuning ourselves to spontaneous, unpredictable phenomena that arise during the process. So rather than imposing fixed structures, we allow to the work to evolve and to respond to the environment in order to really participate. So our choreographic processes is also informed by the book of Jonathan Burrows, a choreographer's handbook, who was also a guest professor of our university. And he emphasizes a lot the composition as a dynamic and iterative practice. So in this book you will find different kinds of examples of how to actually find different ways to structure the meaning in terms of movement. So together these methods create a flexible and responsive framework that blends movement, observation, and site-specific interaction to explore ecological and social themes. What about the human nature, digital space, environment, and performance? Again, a little bit more about the Venetian context. It was already mentioned by my colleagues, but as you may know, Venice is working as a small microcosm. So it is an emblematic space where the evolving relationship between humans and nature can be observed, reimagined, and reshaped. It offers a setting in which sustainable practices and attitudes emerge through an ongoing process of balance and adaptation. About that, I would invite you to read more about Cristina Baldacci, who is a scholar in Foscari. And there is a wide array of artistic and cultural initiatives that have taken root here, especially after the pandemic. So that was a very interesting shift of what happened since the 2020, of how many collectives and people who are, and artists who are more interested into the environmental awareness actually stayed in Venice, even though it is still pushing away lots of people. So the fun part is that in Venice, actually the GPS of the Google map doesn't really work well, nor the 5G network. So it is a city that still kind of escapes of these digital platforms. But in order to collect the data that are connected with this climate awareness, we started with our phones initially, but just to capture all these elements and have it as a digital archive. As you may know also, Venice is a small city, very small in scale, but deeply interconnected with global networks, together also with, and because of the Biennale. It is reflected in the many partnerships and collective efforts that are formed by diverse organizations, community groups, and individuals that are engaged in these ongoing environmental and cultural projects. And again, just a little bit more about our performative methods. We're asking continuously ourselves this notion of threshold, whether between land and water, human and non-human, visible and invisible. It serves both as a thematic and methodological focus, allowing us to question and reimagine the boundaries that shape perception, action, and responsibility. And within this, our work contributes to the growing field of environmental performances by offering participatory, effective, and site-specific tools for engaging communities in critical dialogue and collective imagination around ecological